about 1 year ago, I caught about 20 fish in a stream near me and uploaded them to a site called iNaturalist. The point of iNaturalist is to allow experts and researchers around the world to identify the living thing that you upload. You upload the pictures and they tell you what it is. Now, I uploaded these 20 pictures, and not one was identified down to the species level. In fact, no one ever ended up adding any identification to. That doesn't mean that people didn't look at them, people didn't see them. It means that everybody who saw them was not confident enough to give me a recommendation on what this species could possibly be. And I'm not just talking down to species, this is genus as well. Sometimes even as high as family, people could not identify. And the reason for that is that there has not been enough research and studying on the freshwater minnows of New Jersey. The little silvery guys with black stripes down their side and things like that. There's upwards of 20 species of them, but they're really only used as bait fish. They're not used commonly as game fish. Oftentimes they're so obscure that people don't even know that they exist, or no one pays any eye to them. No one's doing research on them for the most part. And so the little distinctions between them, the things like fin ray counts and stuff like that, are just not being measured. No one is doing that. But as you know, I'm very stubborn. I wanted to identify these fish that I found. And so, about a year ago, I set off to catch every freshwater minnow in New Jersey. I was going to catch each one, photograph all of the fins, distinct parts of the fish. I'm not just going to compile information that I got online, because I'm not sure how accurate that is personally. So instead, I decided I'm going to find every single one myself, take all these measurements myself, and then compare them to things online. And a year later, I have officially caught every freshwater minnow in New Jersey. I have taken distinct and descriptive photos, written descriptions with all attributes that the fish has, and I have an entire master document of all of the descriptions of these fish. And even with that, by the way, it was somewhat difficult to identify between some of the fish, to distinguish between them. But I think that now that I have all the information, I have put together a guide that will make it so that no one struggles identifying one of these fish in New Jersey again. No one will go through that situation that I went through. There is a guide, finally, that allows you to start with a random minnow you found in a stream in New Jersey and get it down to species, not just to genus, to species. And this is what it looks like. It is the New Jersey Freshwater Minnow Dichotomous Key. And it's quite short because, all the information comes down to 20-something species that you're trying to identify. But it will get you from absolutely no clue what any of these things are to the exact species that you're working with. And it has a little note at the top that I didn't include sunfish or catfish or larger game fish, and this is on purpose. For one, those things have been keyed and mapped out 100 times because people care a lot about game fish. People want to identify the thing that they caught in the lake this weekend with, their son or something like that. That doesn't happen with these minnows. People aren't very often trying to get down to species level. They just don't care. They just call everything a bait fish or something like that. And a lot of it is just these people don't have the ability, don't have the knowledge. It's just impossible. Even me, as someone who's extremely interested in freshwater fish in New Jersey, without this key, would still struggle to identify many of the fish that you can find. They are extremely similar, even between genuses. So it makes sense that people aren't trying to identify them, they just call them bait fish or panfish or whatever and move on. So I made this guide specifically for those fish, because those are the ones people struggle with. And also, because the more species you add to a key like this, the less likely the person is to get to the correct answer, right? If you have 50 species, it is far more likely that someone is going to make a little mistake along the way and end up going down the wrong path on the dichotomous key. So I chose specifically to just focus on these freshwater minnows. And this is a task that was considered near impossible, or actually impossible without a laboratory prior to me making this guide. These characteristics are very small and they can just be very hard to distinguish, and they were not well studied. But I am happy to announce that now everyone should be able to identify the freshwater fish that they come across with this guide. Now, some of the groupings are a bit unconventional. You might think as you move through the key, you'll get separated between the different genuses, but sometimes there are fish not even very closely related to a genus mixed in with that genus in the identification. And so someone might consider that unconventional, but my experience has shown that there are sometimes fish which at a, say, young age look far more like fish outside of their genus than fish within them. One example of this is the golden shiner and the comely shiner. One is in the Notomogonus and one is in the Nitropus. They're not that closely related, but when they are both young, they are near indistinguishable. I mean, it is quite difficult to distinguish between the two of them. So those two are grouped together in the key, despite not being very closely related. So, as you may be able to tell, I am very happy with this accomplishment. I've worked on this for a very long time, and I think there's only one thing left to do, and that is to take a fish that I caught a year ago and use my key to identify it. So let's do that. So here is the fish that I am going to identify. Okay, I know what this fish is now, but we're going to work through the key just to prove its usefulness, just to prove everything that it can be used for. So I will leave this photo on screen in the edit, and we will move through this key. So let me go ahead and zoom in to make it very easy. And you start right at the top. All right, so the first thing we need to know is the mouth supraterminal, terminal, or subterminal. Now this just basically means which way is the mouth pointing. And on this guy here, the mouth is just pointing forwards, pointing outwards. So we go to 3. At 3, are there 2 clearly defined and separated dorsal fins or 1 dorsal fin? There is 1 dorsal fin. There are not 2 dorsal fins, 2 fins on the top of that fish. So we go to 7. 7, caudal fin lacks distinct forking or caudal fin has distinct forking. On this fish, the caudal fin bends inwards towards the middle and thus has distinct forking. So we move on to 11. At 11, pelvic fin begins distinctly before dorsal fin, or pelvic and dorsal fins begin at approximately the same horizontal position. So on this fish, it looks like the pelvic fin begins just about where the dorsal fin begins. I mean, it's a slightly further ahead, but it's not what I would call distinctly further ahead. I mean, that we're talking about a couple centimeters at least. So with that, we are going to move on to 16. Now, black coloration on the dorsal fin or no black coloration on the dorsal fin? On the dorsal fin, I see absolutely no black coloration, just the fin rays and membranes. So on to 20. Olive coloration on the dorsal side, white coloration on underside, cleanly separated by a thick black lateral stripe. Or the black lateral stripe is missing, incomplete, or does not cleanly separate 2 colorations. Well, I think the blackish red stripe going down the side of this fish pretty cleanly separates the tan and the white. There's no tan below the line and there's no white above the line. It's a pretty clean separation. So I think we can move to 23. Is there black pigmentation inside the mouth? There is not. This is something you would have to check if you had the fish in person, which is when people use the guide. So there's no black pigmentation in the mouth. We move on to 25. Scales are large and their shape is visible and there are no discolored scales. Or the scales are small or not visible and may have some individual black scales. Well, on this guy, I see very small scales, and I see that there are some random scales on both the top, the middle, and the bottom that have little black colorations on them, which leads us to 25C, aka Rhinichthyes atrachilus, aka the eastern black-nosed dace, and therefore our fish is the eastern black-nosed dace. And that is just one demonstration of how useful this guide can be. So I am very excited to release this to the public. It is publicly available for everybody to use to go through it. If you live in New Jersey, if you catch freshwater minnows, hopefully now you should be able to tell what they are, and we should be able to get a lot more in depth on iNaturalist and identification sites like that. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.